morning and welcome to our active read of the Enchanted Wood. Now we're up to chapter 20 now, and if you remember in the last chapter they had got the children and Moonface and Silky had gone to the land of Take What You Want, which was very exciting. But then Moonface, he didn't watch out, did he, to see that the land had gone and they've got stuck on the land. And then Joe found an aeroplane and they all got in. Let's see where they go off to. Are you ready? Come on then, Poppy. Off to Dame Snap's school. Joe flew the aeroplane very well indeed. As soon as he was high enough, he pressed the straight on handle and the shining aeroplane flew forward. The children leaned over the side to see what they were flying over. They had soon passed the land of Take What You Want and came to a strange, desolate country where no trees or grass grew and not a house was to be seen. "That's the country of loneliness," said Moonface, peering over. "Don't land there, Joe. Fly on." Joe flew on. Once he came to an enormous hill and he had to quickly press the handle marked up or the aeroplane would have flown straight into it. But otherwise it really was great fun. Joe had no idea that it was so easy to fly. The little white goat on Beth's knee, a bit like Poppy, was as good as gold. It licked Beth's cheek every now and then, just as if it were a dog. The hens were good and quiet. Oh. Just somebody walking up the path, don't worry. The hens were good and quiet, and the clock lay perfectly still. The aeroplane flew over a land of great towers and castles. "Giant land," said Silky, looking in wonder at the enormous buildings. "I hope we don't land here." "Rather not," said Joe, and he pressed the straight on handle down still further so that the aeroplane flew like a bird, faster and faster. The children's hair streamed backwards, and as for Silky's mop of golden hair, it looked like a field of buttercups blown in the wind. Over the land of Lollipop they went, and over the country of Flop. And then the aeroplane began to make a funny noise. "Hello," said Joe. "What's wrong?" "I believe the aeroplane's tired," said Moonface. "It sounds out of breath." "Don't be silly, Moonface," said Joe. "Airplanes don't get out of breath." "This kind does," said Moonface. "Can't you hear it panting?" It certainly seemed as if the aeroplane was panting. It went. "Had we better go down and give it a rest?" said Joe. "Yes," said Moonface, peering over the side. "It seems safe enough. I don't know what land this is, but it looks quite ordinary. There's a big greenhouse down below with an enormous garden. Perhaps you could land on that long, smooth lawn, Joe. It shouldn't get too bumpy then." "Right," said Joe, and pressed the handle marked down. And down they went, gliding smoothly. Bump! They reached the grass and ran along on the aeroplane's big wheels. It stopped and everyone got out, glad to stretch their legs. 10 minutes rest and the aeroplane will be ready to go off again," said Moonface, patting it. "I wonder where we are," said Silky, looking around. Moonface gazed at the big greenhouse in the distance, and then he frowned. "Oh my," he groaned. "I know whose house this is. It's a school, and it belongs to old Dame Snap. All the naughty pixies and gnomes and fairies are sent there to learn to behave better. Let's hope Dame Snap doesn't catch sight of us." Everyone looked about nervously. Suddenly down a path came a tall old woman with large spectacles on her long nose and a big white bonnet on her head. "There's Dame Snap there. She looks quite mean, doesn't she?" Moonface ran to the airplane. "Quick," he said, "it's Dame Snap." But the old lady was up to them before they could escape. "Aha!" she said. "So here is another lot of naughty folk sent to me to be cured. Come this way, please." "We haven't been sent to you," said Joe. "We landed here to give our aeroplane a rest. We are on our way home." "Naughty boy to tell stories like that," said Dame Snap, suddenly in such a loud and frightening voice that it made him jump. "Come with me, all of you." There didn't seem to be anything else they could do. Joe, Beth, Franny, Moonface, Silky, the white goat and the 7 hens followed Dame Snap, looking very miserable. The clock wouldn't walk, so Silky had to carry it. Everyone felt very hungry. Joe pulled on Dame Snap's sleeve timidly. "Could we please have something to eat?" he asked. "A meal will be ready in a few minutes," said Dame Snap. "Heads up, everyone. Don't stoop, little girl," snapped the old woman. The little girl she meant was poor Franny, who got such a fright that she stood up straight. Really, Dame Snap was not at all a nice person. It was very bad luck to have landed in her garden. But everyone cheered up a little at the thought of a meal. They were taken into a large hall full of pixies and other fairy folk. They were all sitting down in rows at wooden tables, but they stood up when Dame Snap came into the room. "Sit over there," said Dame Snap, pointing to an empty table. The children, Moonface, Silky, the goat and the hens all took their places. The clock was stood at the end and looked very sulky. The children looked down the tables. "Ooh, what lovely cakes! What big jugs of lemonade!" Dame Snap ran her eyes over the little folk standing at the tables. She frowned. "Twinkle, come here," she snapped. A small pixie walked up to her. "Haven't I told you to brush your hair properly for meal times?" shouted Dame Snap so loudly into Twinkle's ears that he burst into tears. "And there's Doodle over there with a torn shirt," said Dame Snap. "Come here, Doodle." Doodle came and was shouted at very loudly indeed. Beth and Franny felt nervous and hoped their hair and hands and dresses were clean and tidy. "Sit," said Dame Snap, and everyone sat. "Have a cake," said Joe, and passed Beth and Franny a plate of delicious-looking cakes with cherries in the middle. But what a shock for them! As soon as the cakes touched their plates, they turned into round, hard pieces of stale bread. The children didn't dare to say a word. They saw that the same thing happened to everyone in the room except Dame Snap, who had a marvellous meal of cakes, lemonade and sandwiches. The lemonade turned into water as soon as it was poured into the children's glasses. It was all dreadfully disappointing. In the middle of the meal, a gnome servant came in to say that someone wanted to speak to Dame Snap, and she went out of the room. And then, dear me, the children found that the pixies and the fairies in the room were really very naughty indeed. They crowded round them and jabbed at them and pinched them and made such rude remarks that Franny began to cry. They made such a noise that nobody heard Dame Snap coming back again. My goodness, wasn't she angry? She clapped her hands together and made everyone jump nearly out of their skin. "What's all this?" she snapped loudly in a very fierce voice. "Form up in a line. March past me at once." To the children's dismay, the cross old lady shouted right in everyone's ear as they passed. But when they passed her, she didn't shout at them, for she knew that they had been teased by the others. So they were very glad indeed and felt a little more cheerful. "Go to the schoolroom," said Dame Snap, when the last of the line had gone by. So to the schoolroom they all went and took their places, even the little green-winged hens. "Now, please answer the questions written on the blackboard," said Dame Snap. "You have each got paper and pencil. Anyone putting down the wrong answers will be very sorry indeed. Joe looked at the questions on the board. He read them out to the others in great astonishment. Are you ready for these maths questions? Let's see if they're like anything that you would have had. If you take away 3 caterpillars from one bush, how many berries will there be left? Add a pint of milk to a pound of peas and say what will be left over. If a train runs at 6 miles an hour and has to pass under 4 tunnels, say what the driver's mother is likely to have for dinner on Sundays. They are very funny questions. I hope you haven't had any questions like that in your maths lessons. Maybe I'll do some like that for our maths meetings. Everybody gazed at the board in despair. Whatever did the questions mean? They seemed to be nonsense. I can't do any, said Moonface in a loud voice, and he threw down his pencil. It's all silly nonsense, said Joe, and he threw down his pencil too. The girls did the same, and Silky tore her paper in half. All the pixie and fairy folk stared at them in the greatest astonishment and horror. Indeed, said Dame Snap, suddenly looking twice as big as usual. If that's how you feel, come with me. Nobody wanted to go with her, but they found that they had to, for their legs walked them after Dame Snap without them even trying to. It was most extraordinary. Dame Snap led them to a small room and pushed them all in. Then she shut the door with a slam and turned the key in the lock. You will stay there for 3 hours, and then I will come and see if you are sorry, she snapped. This is awful, said Joe gloomily. She's no right to keep us here. We don't belong to her silly school. We haven't been naughty. It was just an accident that we came here. Well, what are we going to do now? Said Silky, pushing back her golden hair. It seems as if we'll have to stay here for 3 hours and then say we're sorry and be shouted at again. I don't like it at all. Nobody liked it. They all sat on the floor and looked angry and miserable. If only they could escape from Dame Snap's silly old school. I don't think I'd like to be part of that school, would you? She doesn't sound very nice at all. Whatever are they going to do? How are they going to escape? I'm going to go and get a cup of tea, and then it will be time for chapter 21. We've got to see what happens. So take a break and then come back to the next chapter. Hi, I'm back with chapter 21. So let's find out what happened at Dame Snap's school and if they escaped. And apologies for the dogs barking in the previous video. Hopefully we won't get any interruptions in this one. This chapter's called Silky's Clock is Very Clever. Joe sat hunched up near to Moonface. Silky and Beth and Franny talked together. The white goat sat on Beth's knee and slept. The 7 hens tried to scratch the hard floor and clucked softly. Where's my clock? Said Silky suddenly. Everyone looked round the room for it. It wasn't there. It must have been left behind in the schoolroom, said Joe. Never mind, Silky. You may get it back if we get out of here in 3 hours' time. I hope so, said Silky. It was a nice clock, and I liked it having feet to walk around on. It's lucky not to be locked up like us, said Joe gloomily. If there was a window in this silly round room, we might break it and escape through that. But there isn't even a small window. And there isn't a fireplace either, said Moonface. If there was, we might squeeze up the chimney. Listen, he said suddenly. There's someone knocking at the door. They listened. Certainly there was someone outside, knocking gently. Come in if you can, said Moonface. Unlock the door if the key's left in. But the key wasn't left in. Dame Snap had taken that away, you may be sure. Who's there? Asked Silky. Ding dong, said a voice softly. It's my clock, cried Silky excitedly. It's come to join us. Woo, said Moonface, his big face going red with joy. Tell your clock to go and get the key from somewhere and let us out, Silky. That's no good, said Silky. I noticed that Dame Snap wore all her keys on a string that hung from her waist. The clock could never get our key from her. Oh, said Moonface sadly. Everybody thought hard. Ding dong, said the clock outside and knocked again. Look here, clock, it isn't any good your dinging and donging and knocking to get in, called Joe. We are locked into this room and we haven't got a key to get us out. Dong, said the clock dolefully. And then it gave an exciting ding and began to dance about on its big feet, up and down, with the little door in its back wide open. Whatever is the clock doing? Said Silky in astonishment. Warming its feet up, I think, said Franny with a giggle. But it wasn't, for it was an old clock that had to be wound up with its own key, and it was jumping about trying to jolt its own key off the little hook inside it. At last it managed to do it. Clang! The key fell to the ground. Whatever is your clock doing? Said Joe to Silky. It must have gone mad. It hadn't. It was being very sensible. It kicked at the door with one of its feet, and the key slid under the door and into the room where the children were. Oh, look, said Moonface in astonishment. Your clock has jiggled its key off the hook and kicked it under the door, Silky. Really, it's a most peculiar clock. Joe snatched up the key. It might fit the door, he said. He tried it in the lock. It almost turned, but not quite. He was dreadfully disappointed. But Moonface grinned. He took the key and rubbed it with a little magic powder that he kept in a box in his pocket. Now try it, he said. So Joe slipped it into the lock once more, and it turned right round and unlocked the door. They crowded quietly out of the room, Joe taking the clock's key with him. Silky gave the clock a hug, and it said ding dong quite loudly with joy. Shh, said Silky. Don't make a sound. We'll try and find our aeroplane, said Joe. Let's try and get out of a door into the garden. We shall soon find it then. They tiptoed down a long passage, but just as they got to the end, who should they see coming along but old Dame Snap herself. Quick, hide behind the curtains. They slipped behind them, but Dame Snap had heard something and came up to the curtains. She was going to pull them apart when Silky's clock walked out, shouted ding dong in her ear, and trod on her toes. Dame Snap gave a shout of rage and she kicked out at the clock. But she missed, and it ran away down the passage with Dame Snap running after it. Good old clock, said Silky joyfully. It just walked out and ding-donged in time. Another minute and we would all have been found. Come on, said Moonface, peeping out of the curtains. We'd better do our best to get into the garden now, whilst the old dame is out of the way. They tiptoed down a long room and came to a door leading into the garden. Just as Joe was going to open it, he pushed them all quickly back into the room. Dame Snap is coming in here, he whispered. Quick, hide behind the furniture. So quick as lightning, everyone crouched down behind the sofas and chairs whilst Dame Snap opened the door and came in grumbling. Wait till I get that clock. And at that very moment, the clock came running in on its flat feet and ding-donged very rudely at her. Dame Snap picked up her long skirts and tore down the long room and up the passage after it. The children and Moonface and Silky, the hens and the goats, rushed to the garden door, opened it and crowded out into the garden. Find the aeroplane, quick, cried Joe. They ran down the path and looked for the shining aeroplane. There it is, shouted Moonface, pointing to the plane standing waiting on the smooth grass. They all ran to it and squeezed in. I don't like leaving my clock behind, said Silky. It has been so clever. I wonder where it is. Look, there it is, with old Dame Snap after it, cried Joe. Sure enough, they saw the clock come waddling out from behind a bush, chiming hard. And Dame Snap was after it, panting and very red in the face. The clock dodged neatly round a bush. Dame Snap tripped over a stone and fell down. The clock shot away to the aeroplane and Silky helped it in. It sank down into a corner and chimed 63 times without stopping. But this time nobody minded. They thought the clock was really quite a hero. Dame Snap picked herself up and ran towards the aeroplane. Joe pressed the up handle. The engine started to whir and hum. The aeroplane quivered and shook. It rose gently into the air and left Dame Snap below, looking very angry indeed. Answer this question, shouted Moonface, leaning overboard. If 5 people, 7 hens, 1 white goat and a clock go up in an airplane, write down how many times Dame Snap will have shouted at them by the time they get home. Everyone giggled. Do be careful where we land next time, said Beth. We really must get home soon. I think I know where we are now, said Moonface, as they flew over a curious land where the trees were yellow and the grass was pink. If you can fly straight on till you come to a silver tower, then fly right till you get to the land of the seagulls, then to the left over the 3 Bears Wood, we shall soon be home. Right, said Joe. He watched out for the silver tower, and when he saw it, tall and gleaming, he pressed the handle marked to the right and flew on till he came to the land of seagulls. This was quite easy to know, for all around and about, flying on snow-white wings, were hundreds of magnificent gulls. The airplane had to go slowly through the crowds of lovely birds. Joe flew to the left, and soon they were over the 3 Bears Wood and saw the rose-covered cottage where Goldilocks lived with the bears. Good, now it won't be long before we're home, said Joe. He flew on till he came over the Enchanted Wood and then landed in a field not far from it. Everyone jumped out. That was a most exciting adventure, said Franny, but I hope we never see Dame Snap again. Oh, quick, catch the clock, said Beth. It's trying to climb out of the plane and it will fall. Dong, 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 said the clock, and it slid to the ground. We'll have to rush home now, said Joe, picking up his shovel. Goodbye, Silky. Goodbye, Moonface. See you soon. Beth, bring the goat, and Franny, I will shoe the hens in front of us. They left the aeroplane for Moonface and Silky to do what they liked with and set off home. And dear me, how astonished was their mother to see the green-winged hens, the snow-white goat, and the fine garden shovel. You must have been to the Enchanted Wood, she said. We've been much further than that, said Joe. And they certainly had, hadn't they? Okay, that's the end of the active read, the book for this week. So more chapters next week. We're getting on. We've only got that much now to go. So hopefully we'll get it done before the end of term.